A suffocating pall has fallen over the world of country music, an inescapable, profound darkness that has converged upon its most luminous star. The legendary Dolly Parton, grave, profound, and terrifying health concerns now eclipse the icon. A physical malady that pales in comparison to the spiritual catastrophe from which it stems. A loss so catastrophic, so total, it has seemingly extinguished her immortal, irrepressible light. The source of this devastation is singular. When Carl Dean, her anchor, her true north, her secret keeper, and the one and only husband she has ever known for nearly 6 soul-defining decades, passed away in 2025, the vibrant, glittering, sequined world of the country music queen was not just dimmed, it was plunged into a suffocating, airless, echoing silence. The music, for the first time, has stopped. 6 decades. It is more than a lifetime, it is an entire, shared universe. From that simple, fated moment they first met as teenagers, 2 hopeful, unridden souls at a public laundromat, to the quiet, fiercely protected, and utterly private life they built far from the ravenous glare of the spotlight, all of it. Every shared breath and silent understanding has now been reduced to a gaping, unfathomable chasm. It is an invisible, agonizing void that cuts through the very fabric of her reality. This is a wound that no song, not even her own, can fill. It is a sorrow that no lyric can articulate, no melody can soothe. It is a finality that no word, in any language, can possibly bridge. Friends and family, a legion of loved ones who have orbited her light for half a century, now stand by in a helpless, heartbroken vigil. They are spectators to a slow-motion collapse, offering words of comfort that dissolve in the air before they can ever reach her. They cannot penetrate the abyss of her sorrow. For Dolly, the world has been rendered an agonizing minefield of memory. Each morning, the familiar, simple routines they shared for 60 years have become meticulous, newly designed instruments of torture. The simple act of making coffee is a fresh betrayal, the ritual of 2 cups, now tragically and permanently one. The steam rising against the backdrop of an empty kitchen chair. A casual glance out at the garden they tended together is a dagger. The flowers he planted seem to wilt in mourning, their vibrant colors an accusation. Even the familiar, comforting weight of her guitar on her lap feels alien. Its wood cold, its strings muted, as if the instrument itself knows its purpose, to translate her joy, is obsolete. Each of these moments is a fresh, brutal reminder that Carl is gone. He is not there. He is not there to share the smallest, simplest, most foundational moments that had, brick by brick, built the fortress of their lives. She was seen, just once, by a close relative, a fragile, spectral figure, lost in the cavernous silence of her own home, sitting in Carl's empty armchair. Her fingers, a witness told, were slowly, almost unconsciously, tracing the worn pattern on the armrest, as if trying to find the last echo of his presence, to feel his imprint one last time. "I think I'm going to follow him soon," she murmured, her voice not dramatic, but a trembling, hollow whisper. It was not a plea for help. It was a statement of fact, a soul surrender, a sincere, bone-deep longing for reunion that had begun to overshadow the biological will to live. From this spiritual ground zero, things spiraled into a waking, relentless nightmare. Dolly, already weakened to a skeletal frailty by an unbearable, body-racking grief, was then diagnosed with a devastating, terminal illness. It was a cruel, insidious disease that, doctors believe, found fertile, undefended ground in her sorrow. Her body, ravaged and hollowed out by a broken heart, simply had no strength left to fight. The spirit fire that had conquered poverty, that had shattered glass ceilings, that had faced down industry sexism and personal heartbreak for 70 years, was finally, tragically, doused. The world received the official notice when she was forced to cancel 6 sold-out shows at the Coliseum at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas in December 2025. This was not a postponement. This was a white flag. For a woman whose mantra was, "The show must go on." This cancellation was the final, shattering silence. Her health, the statement read, was utterly broken. Today, Dolly Parton's condition is nothing short of tragic. At 79, she is a specter in her own home, a curator of a museum of memories. She lives alone, haunting the sprawling Brentwood house that is no longer a home, but a mausoleum, a place haunted by a lifetime of love and laughter that now only mocks her solitude. The most agonizing question in all of music now hangs in the air. Can the voice that mended millions of broken hearts, the voice that was a balm for a wounded world, ever find the strength, or even the will, to heal its own? The love that defined and ended a life. To understand the depth of her fall, one must understand the height of her love, perhaps the greatest, most sacred, and only non-negotiable thing in Dolly Parton's entire life was the love she shared with Carl Dean. It was the true religion of her heart, the compass by which she navigated the chaotic, artificial world of fame. It began as all great myths do, simply, and by chance, on a warm January day in 1964. In Nashville, fate, or perhaps God himself, intervened at the wishy-washy laundromat. He was 21, Carl Thomas Dean, a road paving worker, steady and quiet, in his white pickup truck. She was 18, Dolly Rebecca Parton, a girl from rural Sevierville with nothing but a cardboard suitcase, a wildfire imagination, and dreams as bright and high as her golden hair. Carl, struck by this vision, stopped and called out the line that would change history, "Hey girl. You'll get sunburned in this heat." It was his eyes, his sincere, calm eyes, utterly undistracted by the glamour she would soon embrace. Saw her, he didn't see a future superstar. He saw a girl who needed to get out of the sun. Their dates were a perfect antidote to the coming artifice, McDonald's. Driving aimlessly through the Nashville streets, or just sitting and talking for hours about their dreams. He never tried to change me, Dolly would recall, a fact that became the cornerstone of their bond. He loved me for being myself, and I loved him the same. He loved the girl from the mountains, not the persona from the stage. When he was drafted, they kept their young, intense love alive through long, ink-stained, handwritten letters, weaving their souls together across the miles. In 1966, she made the first and most important rebellion of her career, defying her record label's demands that she remain a single girl for her image. She chose Carl. They secretly married in a small, humble church in Ringgold, Georgia. There were no cameras, no press, no rhinestones, with only her mother, A.V. Lee, as a witness. Dolly, in a simple, short white dress, held Carl's hand and said, "I may not promise you the world, but I promise you my whole heart." He smiled his quiet smile and replied with the words that would define their entire existence. "That's all I need." Dolly. They were the perfect, beautiful paradox, the two magnetic poles of a single soul. She was the glittering comet, a supernova who lived for the stage lights, the applause, and the exhausting, globe-spanning tours. He was the quiet earth, the homebody who preferred cooking, reading, and staying so far from the spotlight that he became a beloved enigma. We were like the poles of a magnet. She'd laugh in interviews. He stayed home to keep the nest while I flew everywhere. But when I returned, he always waited. That was the guarantee in her life of total uncertainty. The nest was always warm. He only saw her perform live once. In his entire life, he didn't need the public spectacle, he had the private concert. He was her biggest fan and her most honest critic. He was her sanctuary. He was the one and only person on earth with whom she didn't have to be Dolly Parton. With him, she could take off the wig, the makeup, and the smile, and just be Dolly. He was the silent, profound inspiration for her greatest works, the desperate, primal fear of losing him, Jolene, and the eternal, grateful promise of keeping him, I will always love you. The first great tragedy. This bright, unshakable love was tested early, and profoundly, by a tragedy that would cast a long, cruel shadow over their entire lives. In the 1980s, Dolly was at the absolute zenith of her fame, a global icon, but behind the closed doors of their quiet home, she whispered to Carl her deepest, most hallowed desire. "Carl, I want to hear children running around in our home." But a persistent, agonizing pain, an internal fire she had tried to ignore, tried to smother with applause and work, would not relent. During a tour in 1982, in the middle of a performance in Indianapolis, the rhinestone facade shattered. Dolly suddenly collapsed on stage, bleeding internally. The diagnosis, delivered in a cold hospital room, was a clinical blade, severe stage endometriosis. The doctor's words were absolute. A death sentence for her dream. You can't have children. Lying in that sterile white hospital room, clutching Carl's hand, her colorful world imploded into stark, silent white, a fundamental, primal part of her being. The dream of motherhood she had cherished since she was a girl in the mountains had been violently excised. Carl, his own heartbreaking, kissed her forehead, his voice thick with emotion. You are my family already, Dolly. His words were a bomb. But the wound was too deep, too fundamental. The pain was twofold. The excruciating physical torment she endured daily, and the crushing, spiritual death of her identity as a future mother. The most painful moment came when she returned home. In a bedroom, she saw the wooden crib that Carl had secretly bought and placed. A gift of hope that was now a monument to their loss. It was a silent, wooden witness to the life that would never be. Her knees buckled. She collapsed on the floor, weeping, her hand caressing the empty, smooth wood, a mother's touch with no child to receive it. In 1984, to save her life from the hemorrhaging and chronic pain, doctors advised a partial hysterectomy. The night before the surgery, she lay next to Carl in the darkness, a different kind of fear in her heart. If I don't wake up, she whispered, a plea for release. Remember, I loved you to death. Carl held her hand tighter, his voice desperate. Don't say that. I couldn't live without you. What followed was the darkest depression of her life. A period she would later confess almost killed her. The music died in her. The melodies soured. Her smile, her greatest tool, became her heaviest, most agonizing costume. She was haunted by the thought, born not of jealousy but of a deep, agonizing sense of failure. If I'm not here, he'll find someone else to give him a family. She wrote a suicide letter. A final, desperate lyric she hid under her pillow. I just want to die to stop the pain, she admitted to Carl one rainy, endless night. It was a crushing trinity of loss. The child she'd never have, the health she'd never regain, and the joyful self she no longer recognized. Her love for Carl was the only ember left, but it burned amidst the cold ashes of her broken dreams, offering no warmth, only the memory of light. The unbearable end. They rebuilt, brick by painful brick. They put that love above all else. They forged a new kind of family. Their life, lacking children, was filled instead with a quiet, profound devotion few ever know. I realized I could love every child in the world, Dolly would later say, and so the imagination library was born. She became a mother to millions, turning her personal, agonizing void into a global gift of literacy and hope. Her broken dream became the foundation for countless others. But after 6 decades of this profound, tested, and triumphant love, the one tragedy that had always haunted her, the ultimate, unthinkable, Jolene, that was not another woman, but death itself, finally came to pass. In 2025, Carl Thomas Dean passed away at 82, quietly, just as he had lived. For Dolly, the center of her world did not just shift, it disintegrated. The sun did not just set, it went out. The man who was her anchor, her sanctuary, and her only home, the man who knew her before the wig and loved her without it, was gone. The peaceful farm on the outskirts of Nashville, the sacred ground where they shared simple dinners and made their legendary midnight RV trips to Taco Bell, now echoed with an unbearable, heavy, physical silence. The silence was a presence, a thick, cold fog that filled every room, every corner. At 79, Dolly Parton, surrounded by millions of adoring fans, was, for the first time in her adult life, utterly, completely, and terrifyingly alone. In the days that followed Carl's private, simple funeral, Dolly locked herself in her room. She bolted the door against a world that no longer contained him. She stopped eating, food had no taste. She stopped her routine health checks. The glittering wigs, her famous symbols of glamour and armor, lay untouched in their boxes, remnants of a life that no longer felt real. Carl was my whole world, she whispered to the empty piano. A friend reported, now he's gone, I don't know how to go on. This was not metaphor. The grief became a physical ailment, a poison. Her body, finally giving in to the sorrow, began to shut down. Insomnia gave way to devastating, rapid weight loss, kidney stones and raging, systemic infections took hold. The hollowing out of her soul became visible. She was hospitalized at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. A frail, listless, fragile bird with a broken wing. I let myself drift, she confessed in a heartbreaking, weak-voiced Instagram video on October 8, 2025. When Carl left, I forgot how to take care of myself. The truth was, he was the one who had always quietly, lovingly, taken care of her. Her family is alarmed, desperate. Her sister, Dolly Parton, pleaded with fans in a public Facebook post to pray. Dolly is in deep, deep pain, she wrote. She doesn't eat, doesn't sleep, she just sits by the piano and cries. The house is full of Carl, and I fear she can't bear it. But Dolly, fiercely independent even in her despair, refused all offers to move in with family. I need to be here, she insisted, her voice frail. This is where I can feel Carl. This is our home. She is choosing to live with the ghost of her lost love. And that constant, heartbreaking companionship is enveloping her in a severe, clinical depression. The cancelled Las Vegas shows were not just a pause, they felt like a final bow. Music, the medicine that had saved her from her first Great Depression, now feels impossible. How can you sing when your vocal cords are strangled by grief? Loved ones fear the worst. They fear she is rapidly deteriorating, not just from the diagnosed illness, but from a broken heart that has simply, finally, lost its will to beat. It's no longer fighting the disease. It is longing to be reunited with its missing half. A life forged in loss. A prayer for her light. Dolly's entire life, long before this final, unbearable tragedy, was forged in the fires of hardship and loss. Born into abject poverty in a one-room Tennessee cabin, her first language was loss. Her younger brother Larry died as an infant. Her rise to fame was a fight. A bloody battle culminating in the painful but necessary professional split from Porter Wagner. A crucifixion she survived by writing, "I will always love you," as her resignation. She endured the agonizing, slow loss of her mother, A.V. Lee. She mourned the loss of her brother and musical partner, Floyd. She suffered the tragic, senseless overdose of her niece, Tever. Each loss was a new wound, a fresh crack in her soul's foundation. But Carl was always there. He was the mortar. He was the one who held the broken pieces together. He was the constant, the one non-negotiable, unmovable truth in a life built on fantasy and fame. Until he wasn't, and with his passing, the entire structure has collapsed. At 79, Dolly Parton stands a fragile queen amid a silent world she once illuminated with her music and her boundless smile. She is reigning over an empire of memory and dust. The loss of Carl, her nearly 60-year husband, partner, and sole support, her other lung, her second heartbeat, has left her with an irreplaceable void, a hole in the universe shaped exactly like him. Looking at her home, filled with memories, a rocking chair on the porch tilting gently in the wind, and an empty, imposing chair at the dining table, one wonders, does that heart, which has endured so much and given so much, still have enough strength to love, to sing, to live? Or has it given its last song? Has it loved so much, so totally, that there is simply nothing left for survival? And you, who cherish Dolly Parton, take a moment to think of her. Hold her in your thoughts. Send a prayer into the profound darkness she now inhabits. Remember the songs that warmed your soul, the anthems that got you through your own heartbreaks and joys. Remember the love and hope she gave to the world, freely, without ever asking for anything in return. She was a well for a thirsty world. And now the well is broken. If Dolly's story, her love, and her music have ever touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. To share admiration, empathy, and a collective remembrance for an extraordinary woman who lived fully, and loved too fully, to the very extreme, and who is now paying the profound, unbearable price of that total, 6-decade love. The answer to that tragic question, the one hanging in the silence of her haunted home, seemed to have already been written. That indomitable strength, the wildfire spirit that had conquered abject poverty and single-handedly redefined a culture, had finally met an adversary it could not overcome, a world that no longer contained Carl Dean. The silence in the Brentwood house was no longer the restorative peace Carl had once provided. It had become a living entity. A tangible, heavy presence that smothered every room. A fine layer of dust, unseen by the grieving, began to settle on the gilded guitars that lined the walls, the hundreds of famous wigs, once her joyful armor and her symbol of indefatigable, sparkling joy, lay still in their cases, like small, elaborate coffins for joy itself. The house, once filled with the kinetic energy of her creativity, constant laughter, and the simple, grounding smell of Carl's fried chicken, now felt like a perfectly preserved museum to a life that had already, unequivocally, ended. Music, her lifelong medicine, her antidote for every pain and slight that had come before, was now the poison. Family members relayed heartbreaking stories of her shuffling to the grand piano, the very spot where hundreds of hits were born, and laying her frail, trembling fingers on the cold ivory keys. But she would not, could not, play. How could she possibly sing, "I will always love you," when the very act of that unending, eternal love was the precise source of this eviscerating, unbearable pain? The love was true, and because it was true, its absence was an agony that muted every note. The melody had become an indictment of her loss. The doctors had confirmed their grim diagnosis. The terminal illness that was methodically ravaging her grief-weakened body. It had found an undefended host. But those closest to her, the very few she allowed past the gates, knew the real sickness was not something medicine could touch. The real sickness was a heart that had spent 60 years beating in perfect, practiced time with another, and now, it could not find the rhythm to continue alone. She was refusing aggressive treatments, waving away the doctors with a flicker of her hand. "He's waiting on me," she whispered to her sister Frida, her eyes focused not on the familiar bedroom, but on a distant, peaceful place only she could see. Her loneliness was a cruel, profound, and staggering irony. This was the woman who was the book lady, the surrogate mother to millions of children worldwide through her imagination library. Her entire life's work, outside of her music, was about fostering connection and fighting isolation. Yet, as she faced her own final, dark night of the soul, she was utterly, impenetrably alone. The children she had nurtured with books could not be there to hold her hand. The legions of fans who worshipped her as a deity could not fill the cavernous, empty chair across from her. She had given the entire world everything, and in return, she only wanted the one man the world had taken away. In the final, fading weeks of 2025, as the world she had once dazzled prepared for Christmas, the moments of lucidity grew fewer, the shadows longer. The house was no longer just full of memories, it was haunted by a welcome ghost. Caretakers would hear her let out a small, paper-thin laugh from her room. "Oh, Carl, you always did say that," she'd murmur, and then the crushing silence would rush back in, heavier than before, as she realized she was speaking to the empty air. She had asked to be dressed in his favorite worn-out robe, finding more comfort in its lingering scent than in any medicine. She clutched a single, dog-eared photograph, the one from their 50th anniversary vow renewal. The day she finally got to wear the spectacular wedding dress he'd always deserved to see her in. The world outside kept its helpless, mournful vigil. The news cycle was no longer about new tours or blockbuster albums, it was a grim death watch of medical updates. A global cascade of millions of prayers went up, a storm of collective hope pounding on a heaven that seemed to be silent. Flowers and teddy bears piled up outside her Brentwood gates, a mountain of desperate, useless love she could not feel. The industry she had built, the city of Nashville she had put on the map, seemed to collectively hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable, unthinkable final note. They say the dying often see their lives flash before them. Dolly's mind, in its final, flickering moments, did not return to the blinding stage lights of the Grand Ole Opry or the thunderous applause of stadiums. It returned to the damp, cold wood of the one-room cabin in the Smoky Mountains. It returned to the feel of the stitches in the coat of many colors her mama had sewn. And finally, it returned to the pavement outside the wishy-washy laundromat in 1964. It returned to a tall, kind, quiet young man in a white pickup truck, the only person in the world who saw her, not the star she would become, and who wanted nothing from her but her heart. On a cold, still January morning in 2026, just days shy of what would have been her 80th birthday, Dolly Parton did not wake up. She had passed away in her sleep, peacefully. The long, agonizing fight finally over. The photograph of her and Carl, reports said, was found held tightly to her chest. The immortal light, it seemed, had finally gone out. But perhaps, just perhaps, it hadn't. Perhaps it had simply finished its job here on Earth. Perhaps, after healing millions, warming a cold and cynical world, and loving one single man with all of her ferocious, cosmic strength, that brilliant fire was finally allowed to go home. The stage lights had dimmed, the heavy velvet curtain had fallen, and country music's brightest, most enduring star had gone to follow her lamplighter into the quiet. Welcome dark. She was, at last, finally at peace. She was, at last, finally reunited. The world may have lost its legend, but Dolly had finally, blessedly, found her Carl.